Brandon, unfortunately, we've been talking about this for many years. It's not the first time this is being brought up. And why America couldn't do anything differently and turn things around and change people's perception about the problem and their practices. Brandon?
Well, this is a problem that is as much a problem of the heart as it is a problem that is systematic. That's a problem with the justice system. That's a problem with law enforcement. That's a problem with government. People have to Laura's point, when they're engaging with other people, recognize that everyone has bias and put in the work that's necessary to address the bias, conscious or unconscious, that you have, and make sure that that bias doesn't impact how you treat other people, especially when you're in a position of power. You know, yesterday was actually the 99-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so African Americans, after being enslaved for so long, after going through the Reconstruction period, after being tormented by the KKK and others, and after having these incredible laws put in place against them to limit voting rights and limit their ability for economic mobility, built this place called Greenwood, Black Wall Street, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there were over 300 black-owned businesses. Anything that you could think of that you would need existed there. It was destroyed by a white mob off of a dubious claim that was made by a white woman about a young black man, and that area was burned to the ground. These issues aren't new, but the greatest thing about Black Wall Street and Greenwood is that it was actually rebuilt bigger and better the second time. What ended up killing it was the fact that there were more opportunities for African Americans in other places, and they built a highway through it. But these issues aren't new. Every time these things happen, Black Americans are able to come back and build something even better, do something even greater, continue to make positive contributions. And so progress is being made. It's certainly not as quick as we want it to be, but what everyone can do is look at themselves and say, what bias do I have, conscious or unconscious, and how can I make sure that the decisions I'm making aren't going to impact someone else negatively, especially when I'm in a position of power. But that's how we get there. And there's some policy pieces to it as well, but ultimately it's personal.
We've also collected some social media users' opinions on what happened in Minneapolis. Let's take a look at what some of them have been saying. Jared Sexton said, listen, there are white supremacists looking to start a race war operating within the protests. They are escalating tensions to either cause America to collapse or lead to Trump seizing power. Their end goal is a fascist dictatorship. So, Laura, of course, leadership is important in racial issues. Do you think the current American leadership fails somewhere in channeling the racial problem into a constructive way?
I do, and I think we've failed on federal, state, and local levels, as by what we saw within this officer plus his 3 other officers in Minneapolis, and as Brendan pointed out, over even just the last few months in America. And so I do believe that we are all leaders in our own right and have the power to make change on our block in whatever way we can. But I look to the rollback of funding for and programs that were put in place during the Obama administration that were working to a degree, that were taken away during the Trump administration. Leadership comes from the top. I mean, no matter what, we always look to those who lead. What we look to celebrities for what makeup to wear. We look to our politicians to see how we can lead, how we can set an example. But very ironically, what we've seen is leadership by bully, and this is becoming a normal. It's becoming accepted when we see President Trump's horrible behavior towards women, towards Black Americans, towards peers. And I think that is absolutely filtered down to every level. So leadership starts at the top, but if we want to change that, we need to get out and vote. And we have seen numbers change, and we need to make sure we get a bigger participation, and especially in the eyes of this pandemic, do it in a way that's safe and accessible to all. And I do believe that leadership can be changed if we put our minds to it and get out and make our voices and our votes heard.
Do you agree,
That's
Brendan?
really, and right now is the time.
Brendan, do you agree that President Trump and his administration share at least some of the blame for causing this, or at least exacerbating the racial problem in the U.S.?
Yeah, I don't think there's any excuse for the Trump administration dismantling that 21st century task force and taking away much of the progress. Now, that task force wasn't perfect, but it was certainly a step in the right direction. The Trump administration was, of course, did get the First Step Act passed, which is a positive thing. However, when it comes to policing, removing that task force and the recommendations that it made definitely wasn't the right thing. But here's what we need in terms of leadership. One, we need our leaders to say the right things. We need our leaders to say that this is obviously a problem and it's something that needs to be addressed. It's amazing that I think so much of the progress over the past decade, almost since Trayvon Martin was killed, has been focused on just getting people to believe, Black Americans, to believe that this is a problem, to believe that this happens consistently. And I think that the fact that that's such a basic thing, or at least it would seem to be, hides so much of the progress that has been made, because so much effort has had to be put into just getting people to believe, Black people to believe that this happens. So first, we need leadership to do that. Second, we need leadership to address inequities in the justice system, to make sure that just because you don't have the funding to be able to get things like cash bail, to make sure that just because you don't have the funding to get a good lawyer doesn't mean that you don't have the same rights as other people who may have the economic means to bail themselves out, or the economic means to hire a lawyer from the outside.
Brendan, earlier you mentioned COVID-19 and its impact disproportionately probably to the African American communities. The death rate of African Americans are higher than the majority whites in America. And that also has economic inequalities, access to health care problems. So these problems are deep-rooted problems in America, and they are also human rights issues. How do you look at all these in a holistic way?
Yeah, well, the repeal and replace movement that really was just a repeal movement for Obamacare, we're seeing the direct impact of those decisions by Republican lawmakers and by Donald Trump. Unfortunately, the economic gains that have been made over the past few years in terms of historically low unemployment for African Americans haven't been matched with the creation of a safety net, in particular a safety net that's going to protect people from what can be one of the most catastrophic issues, which is health care costs for people. And I think because of lack of health care, you've seen African American and minority communities in the U.S. more generally impacted severely by COVID-19, with, in the case of African Americans, dying at rates double nationwide what their percentage of what our percentage of the population is. And so these problems existed before the Trump administration was here. Certainly these problems have existed for generations, but removing the 21st Century Task Force, this repeal movement without having a suitable replacement, not ensuring that African American businesses have access to capital so that they can hire and build, all of these things have kind of come to a head during this COVID-19 pandemic and put African Americans in a position that is really unfortunate in terms of the loss of life and in terms of the impact on the community. And again, you're seeing that play out in the streets, this frustration that in every sector, there's issues. Go ahead.
And to the wider issue of human rights, because Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, warned that the coronavirus pandemic has become a human rights crisis. As we've been talking with Brendan, the equal access to health care and the equal treatment of all people. It seems this is not something that is supposed to happen in the United States, who claim itself to be the greatest nation on earth, Professor.
Well, you know, as a Chinese, I do find, my observation is that it seems that United States today is a tale of two cities. There are two Americas. One is majority, and the other is minority. And, you know, the United States boast itself of leads the world in the protection of human rights. But nowadays, I think that it's quite sad that the U.S. leads the world in the COVID-19 confirmed cases and death tolls. So from the perspective of Chinese, I do believe that what is happening in the United States is quite sad.
So, Brendan, do you see what happened in Minneapolis in May this time may serve as a wake-up call so that people can do enough soul-searching and do things differently from now on?
I do see it as a wake-up call. I do see it as something that everyone should take notice of, from the corporate side, from the government side, and of course from the personal side. There are things that everyone can be doing, again, on the corporate side, making sure that on corporate boards, in terms of suppliers and supplier diversity, in terms of hiring practices, making sure that African American and Latinx individuals have the opportunity to get those jobs and build wealth. On the government side, fixing things like the cash bail system that seems to reward people that have economic means but punish people who do not have economic means when they encounter the justice system. And then on the personal side, everyone has bias, so ensuring that you are recognizing that you have bias, conscious or unconscious, and that you're taking steps to ensure that whatever bias you have isn't impacting other people in a negative way, especially if you find yourself in a position of power.
Laura, do you share the same optimism? The wound will be healed?
I believe that this is an opportunity, but in order to act on this opportunity, we need to educate and empower the public with information on their elected officials and the way in which they are voting, in what they are proposing and what they are against, so that we can, in an educated fashion, go to the ballot box this November. It's very interesting with the timing of this terrible tragedy. We do have the chance within 6 months to make that change, but we have to see it as an opportunity and then take action to ensure that we rally together and we drown out the riots and the disgusting acts in the evenings. This is our chance. This is our opportunity, and we need to empower those around us to rally together and take it as one.
All right. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Brendan. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching.